Welcome to session 5 of Motivating Reluctant Learners. Today, now that you've selected investments and you've addressed potential barriers, we need to get students on board. So, the next step is to ask students to commit to the investment and guide their first steps toward motivated behavior. And motivation is a fuzzy concept. We have all different ideas of what motivation is, and often our idea of motivated behavior differs wildly from our students. So we cannot assume that students will understand intuitively what investments they should be making in the classroom. If you just ask your students, be motivated, without it being clear what you mean by motivated, what motivations will look like, how they'll behave differently if they are motivated, then you're leaving their investing to chance. And unless you specifically ask your students to make the investment you're looking for, we're unlikely to get it. So students, getting them to invest in your classroom is really a two-step process. First, we're going to secure that initial commitment to invest, either one-on-one with individual students or with groups who are exhibiting the same reluctance to engage. Then, once we have secured that initial investment, we're going to give students specific direction on the next steps they're going to need in order to be successfully invested over the long term. And in this session, we're going to talk about both of those things. So we're going to begin by talking about securing that commitment to invest. During this stage, the goal is to get students to understand what we are asking of them and agree to do it. That's all. So you just want them to make a commitment. So I'm going to cover 5 things that's important to keep in mind during this stage of the conversation. So the first one we're going to talk about is be private. Don't embarrass unmotivated students by making our request public. For some students, asking for a private conversation after class might be a good approach. Others might find this kind of one-on-one meeting intimidating. So you are going to look for opportunities to speak privately with students at your desk, after class, while other students are working, lunch, after school, even with another trusted adult, such as a parent or a counselor. The key is to find a time and a place where students are comfortable and free from public scrutiny. The second one I'm going to talk about is be succinct. Sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot by using too many words. Students become confused about what we're asking or sometimes bombarded with choices that they end up making no investment at all. So we want to state our request using as few words as possible. You may not, or you may want your students to make several investments over the course of the year, but we're going to focus each request on what we want students to do then and now. The next one is be positive. Being positive in your request for investment is about shifting students' focus from the negative to the positive. So instead of calling students' attention to the unmotivated behavior they need to stop, so like stop falling asleep in class, or you don't turn in your homework, instead focus on motivated behavior we want them to start. So hey, stay awake for the entire period, or let's try turning in some homework on time. Then we want to be specific. Often, our requests are too vague. So we can use precise words to ask students for the investment we desire. So think about the work we did in previous sessions to refine what our target investment is. Use that as a starting point to narrate for students the different kinds of behaviors we want to see. So rather than saying to a student that, we want them to start paying better attention, for example, ask them to take notes, or keep their head off the desk, or track you with their eyes as you teach, or ask questions related to the class discussion. So we want to focus on what the student can do right now to succeed from this point forward. Be quiet. After you ask for an investment, we want to be quiet. Don't explain the reasons for asking. Just stop talking and wait and let the student speak next. Even if it takes like 10 minutes, be quiet and wait patiently for the student to agree. Many reluctant or resistant students have gotten very good at waiting people out. So we have to demonstrate to them that we're willing to wait for the commitment that we want. Sometimes students are silent because they need time to process. That could be it too. what we're asking them to do, and to figure out if they're going to do it. So don't interrupt that internal dialogue that they're having. Being silent gives them, in this situation, the time that they need to make their commitment. And if during that conversation you have any doubts that a student is not actually, committing to an investment, try this conversation again at a different time. So this might take a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but with the student group we're talking about, don't rush it or force it. They're going to make that initial commitment to invest. They're going to need those next steps to go into it successfully. All right, showing students how to invest successfully. Most kids, if asked, will tell you that they want to do well in school. So disengaged students' problem isn't necessarily that they don't want to do well, but they don't know how to do well. Even if that's not the internal dialogue they're having with themselves. So teachers can sometimes exacerbate this problem. I've been there by sending students mixed messages, right? We tell them that they should just try, implying that effort's the key to success. But we know ourselves as adults that this isn't necessarily true. Some students who try their best still don't see a payoff eventually, and then they realize for themselves and they just give up. So we can get much better results by giving our students a clearly mapped path to success. I remember learning this lesson for myself. I used to get very frustrated when the majority of my students would regularly miss deadlines I'd set for finishing like a novel or a reading passage. I was thinking to myself, why are they so unmotivated? Then one day, it finally occurred to me that all of these unmotivated readers had started the passage, and they just didn't finish it. So maybe it wasn't that they weren't willing to make this investment, but that they didn't really understand how to invest successfully. So when I assigned, the next passage, I asked students to read the first couple pages in class, and then to time themselves to see how long it took. When everybody had finished and recorded their time, I asked them to divide their time by 3, the number of pages they read, and then multiply by the number of pages in the passage. And for that final answer, represented approximately how much time it would take them to finish the novel. And at my direction, the students went on to take out their planner, some of them, schedule reading time over the next 2 weeks. I modeled that on the board as well. So I challenged them to, figure out how they were going to find the time they needed in order to read the passages by the assigned due date. And when the due date arrived, all but 3 students had finished the readings. So those 3 admitted that they hadn't stuck to their schedule. So it was a great first step. But the reason for this dramatic change was it because my students were properly motivated? No. It was because I had asked them for the right investment in the right way. I got them to commit to reading the passages assigned, and I showed them how to do it. So instead of giving them vague directions to finish the passages, I helped them understand the investment of time it would take in order to meet the deadline. And then I helped them figure out how they could make that investment. The lesson here is that once we've secured students' initial agreement to invest, we have to immediately begin to show them how to invest successfully. It isn't enough just to identify that endpoint. The ultimate investments we want students to make. We also need to think about what pathway to high motivation might look like to our students. So, to talk about this, we're going to identify 2 pieces of guidance. Number 1, always identify and communicate the investment's first step. If you've read James Clear, Atomic Habits, we always want to plan for the starting line rather than planning for the finish line, because a lot of people don't make it to the finish line. So say that you've secured students' commitment to pay attention during your lessons. Then what are the critical behaviors students need to implement immediately? Do we want them to take notes during your lecture? Do you want them to stop interrupting others? Or do you want them to just stay awake? What is one thing a student can do dramatically to alter their investment during your lesson? And once you've decided that first step to investment, we have to communicate it clearly. It is not enough for us to just know what we want to see. Students need to know this too in very explicit terms. Which brings us to our second point. Be sure to provide the tools necessary to complete the first steps critical activities. So if we want them to take notes during class, we're going to have to show them how to do it. If we want them to stop interrupting, we're going to have to tell them what they should be doing instead. And if we want them to stay awake, then we're going to give them strategies for doing so. So showing students how to meet the demands of the investments we're asking of them is one way to ensure that they can fully commit. All right, sometimes we might ask ourselves, what if students still won't make the investment I want, right? If you've gone through the steps outlined so far, we've talked about to help students invest in your classroom, and your students still won't make a commitment, here are a couple steps you can take. One, make sure that you have removed all unintentional barriers to successful investment. I know that you spent time thinking about this earlier, but give it another look. Is there something that we overlooked? Is there something we didn't consider that is a barrier that might get in students' way? Double checking to ensure that we've removed all barriers to investing might help. Two, enlist the help of other trusted adults. It feels bad when I have to admit to myself that someone else is going to be able to do this a little bit better than me, but it works, especially for those students who need it. So who does your student who's resistant trust? Can a parent or guardian, guidance counselor, administrator, teaching aide, para, security guard, maintenance person, a different teacher, can any of them help you work with that student? You want to look for an adult that the student trusts and enlist that person's help in securing the commitment from that student. And finally, last tip, look for bright spots and study the areas where students are investing already. It's like a cheat sheet. So try and figure out what students are investing in both inside and outside of school and determine, if you can, why they are investing in those places. Is the student doing the work for another teacher because that teacher works with them or works with them after school or has built rapport with the student? Do we need to do the same before asking for an investment from them? Is the student invested in a particular video game or book series at home? Can we talk to the student to discover what is so appealing about that, outside of school work and how we can use those elements in our own classroom? So you want to study the investments your students are currently making because they might have clues for how we can secure a similar investment from our students. All right, this brings us to our reading this week and our homework. So we're going to read through chapter 3 in our book, Value, Involvement, and Influence. And I want you to think, out of all the suggestions it provides you, what ideas, strategies, or suggestions are you encouraged to try and why? Or that feel new to you? Or which one of those give you hesitation that you maybe have thought about using in the past or have tried but haven't gotten 100% success with? Question number 2, very few people really like being told what to do. I know. Nonetheless, we all get and give directions. So how do you want people to convey expectations or requirements to you in your personal or work life? Do some people tell you what to do more effectively than others? What do they say? How do they say it? Do they involve you in the decision making? Do they seek your input? Do they treat you in a dignified way? What matters? Obviously, our importance here is we want to see what works in our own situations to see if we can replicate that with our students. And the final discussion question for this week is, why is it important to do each of these? Why is it important to let go of the need for the last word when a student pushes your buttons? And why is it important to welcome back a student immediately upon return from referral or a time out of class? All right, those are our questions. In our next session, we are going to put everything we've talked about together on the theory side, talking about applications. We're going to read our next chapter about building relationships. Can't wait to see what you all come up with.